we had to learn this lesson. Now this lesson
Mm.
is learned, and anytime that I start another business after 2XU or whatnot, I now have learned like only okay after 6 people, then I hire a manager. That's kind of now in my head every single time. So then it's a little bit easier and kinder on myself to get to that point because I went through all of that other crap that I had to go through in the first place.
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to the Share.care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own interest to help others. Now, today, it is my great and awesome pleasure to welcome aboard Lai Lacaba. Now, Leanne is a CEO and co-founder of 2XU. She's an international speaker, an author, and an expert when it comes to hiring a virtual assistant. Now, she has been working from home since she was 15, published her own books at 18, became a CEO at 20, yes, 2020, and partnered up with her boss to start 2XU Executive Services at 23. And her aim is to help 10,000 entrepreneurs grow remotely. Welcome, Leanne. Now, I'm exhausted from saying all that at your age. Wow.
Well, hey, David. No, pleasure to be here. And yeah, whenever I think about it, it does sound exhausting, but that was kind of just my life, one after the other.
Well, do you want to take us back? Can you jump in the Wayback Machine? And you're pretty young. You may not remember this, but there was a movie called Back to the Future, and it had a silver DeLorean. It was a time. Oh, she's nodding her head.
I
Fantastic. I've
watched
got
it. I
someone I
watched it.
connect with. So when you hit 88 miles an hour, you could travel through time. So do you want to jump in the driver's seat, put your foot to the floor? Let's hit 88 miles an hour. Can you take us back in time to some key moments in your life that were pivotal moments for you? They might have been challenges, might have been experiences, things that inspired you to do what you're doing now.
Well, first part of my story is I'm from the Philippines, and I'm the eldest of four. So what that means is when you're an Asian kid and you're the eldest daughter, that means that you're the second mom. That's like the automatic thing. So part of my journey of being curious, of being wanting to be independent, was being treated as is. And an additional part of that is my dad worked overseas for most of my life. I would see him once or twice a year because way back then, that was one of the biggest ways that you can earn a lot of money was to work overseas. And my mom was a government employee. So most of the time it was just me and my siblings and me acting as that second mom. Um, and it put a lot of pressure on me of like making sure I had really good grades. It put a lot of pressure to be that role model for my siblings. So when I was 11, I first found out that I loved writing, which I got from my mom. Did journalism club, big bookworm, could read. I still can read a book a day if I wanted to. And that's kind of a background of how a lot I absorbed things super quickly. And then when I was 15, because there was a time in the Philippines where uh, by the time you're 15, 16, you've already graduated high school. You're now going into college. They've changed it. But when I was 15, I just graduated high school and I was bored out of my mind during summer. And it was 2011 and I found this little website that said Blogspot. And I was like, huh. So I could start publishing the things that I usually the angst, all the teenage angst I keep inside me all the time.
Mm.
And I found this little cute little Facebook group where we did like comment for comment. And in one of those people who commented on my blog post, they messaged me like, "Hey, I like the way that you write. Can you be a ghostwriter for me?" And at the time, I had no idea what a ghostwriter was. But me being me, I said yes, and that's kind of the if I always said that if I was going to write a autobiography for my book, it'll be yes and, because that's basically how I started taking off everywhere else. I did writing, I did graphic work, I did video editing, anything anyone threw at me, I would do, and that was kind of an eye opener for me that I could get paid working from home. And
Mm.
at that time, PayPal barely serviced the Philippines. Like they didn't have any banks that would connect to it. So what usually had to happen is we had a family friend send over my money, basically coming in from my client from the US or wherever. So that's kind of the journey that I took on starting to work from home. And then when I was 18, there was this horrific Category 5 typhoon. It was like 250 kilometers per hour, almost 300,
Mm.
that barreled through our little city. And for us, we were facing the ocean, which meant there was a storm surge and the water rose up to our first floor.
Wow.
And imagine little me, I'm 4'11", so that's really little. Little me went back to our kitchen on the first floor because I was trying to grab groceries. I was trying to grab anything that I can because I
Mm.
didn't know how long that quote unquote flood would be. And the water was starting to rise just above my almost to my chin.
Wow.
And I was like, well, I'm gonna die. That was kind of
Oh
the
my God. Yeah.
automatic thing in my head. I was like, oh, this is it. And I had this incredible feeling of, people always say your life flashes before your eyes.
Mm.
Um, at that point, I was a third year college student. I was 1 year away from graduating. I had a pretty good life up to that point. And instead of a flash back, I went flash forward. Like I went through
Oh,
what
really?
my life would have been if I followed the path my mom and I have set. You know, when you're an Asian kid, you're
Mm.
either a lawyer, an accountant, or a doctor. My mom picked lawyer because I was a natural writer. Um, and I felt that feeling of I hated it. Like that was just the core
Mm.
response. It was like, it was 30 seconds, but it felt like a lifetime going through that feeling of I don't want to be just that. And I made a
Mm.
vow like, hey, if I make it through this, I'm going to change the way that I'm going to actively choose what I wanted for my life. And after that, I, for some reason, until now, I basically blacked out. When I came to, I was already like climbing our stairs from the railing, side railing, to the second floor. Everyone was good. My three siblings, and my grandmother were all safe, and we had help. We had everything else. And then we moved to another island for a little bit because, of course, the my city was inhabitable for a little bit. Um, and I started making these changes. Like my laptop sadly did not survive, but the memory card did. So I saved
Mm.
all the books, all the articles, all the things that I created. And I started looking at like, hey, how do I get published? So on and so forth. Discovered Kindle direct publishing, even though before self-publishing was anything.
Yeah.
Self-published my own book. That's how I self-published it at 18. And I started looking for work that I actually love doing. And then I stumbled upon this publishing company that was just a startup, and they loved it that I had a background of publishing my own book, because that means they didn't really need to train me how to do it.
Yeah.
Um, Started doing that full time. That was my first full time work. 2 years later, they were like, "Hey, we're looking for someone to start leading the company because we're going to start two different companies with the current managers." And I was like, me, and I like raised my little hand, and then I got training on how to be
Jump up.
CEO. Yeah. I got training to be CEO for that company. So that's how I got to, when I was 20, became CEO of that company.
Wow.
And then basically at that point, I was just learning whatever I can. I would absorb business books. I fell in love with marketing, so I absorbed marketing books and courses and everything that I could get my hands on. And I knew that I was operating a lot on the survival mode of like,
Mm.
I want to make my life have meaning, versus like if I died in that storm surge when I was 18, I wouldn't have had that meaning yet because I was still so young. Um, and then when I was 23, I basically automated the publishing company to the point where I didn't even have to be there anymore. And I told my boss at that time, I was like, hey, I want to start a service company. I want to give back to Filipinos who don't know the work from home thing exists, who
Mhm.
does, so they don't have to go overseas to find a good job. So then I other kids don't have to experience what I did, where my dad always had to leave for
Mhm.
months and months at a time. So then we started 2XU, which we started it as a course teaching other people how to do it, how to hire. And then we had a person, when we were doing a speaking tour in Singapore, they said, I love what you teach. I just don't want to do it. Can you do it for me? And that was when 2XU got started up as a agency, then not anymore a course. And 4 years later, we've been growing. We've been an amazing journey, lots of ups and downs, but it's been a very interesting thing starting an actual service business from scratch. Because before then, I would sell bookmarks, I would sell stickers at school, so on and so forth. But it's the first one where it's like a hiring people, so then I could build a business with.
Wow. That I want to come back to the flash forward part, but before we get to that, you talked about you didn't want other people to experience what you experienced with your dad being gone. And through a number of things that you were saying, I heard that your aim was to really, your focus was to help people. How much of that was the driving factor to make other people's lives better? And where do you think that came from?
It came from I think it naturally kind of comes from being the older sister. Like I'm being that second mom around the house, of like always kind of catching things or helping around whenever I can. And then for the realization of how I wanted it to be a full circle moment of teaching other people how to do it, it actually started with my sisters. My sisters at that time when I started to XU, they were 15 and 16, which is around the time I got started. And they were like, ate, which is older sister in Tagalog. Ate, I want to learn how you did it. Like, how did you do like working from home? How did you start? And that kind of, just that question of like that sparked me of like, oh, I can do this for all the families. Like if I started with my sisters will tell their friends. If I start hiring moms, I mean a lot of moms into XU, they'll start teaching their kids and they'll start teaching the rest of their neighborhood. It started like I started seeing this web in my head of like, if I teach just one person how to work from home and they did it, other
Mm,
people will be inspired to keep doing it and over again. So that's kind of where that drive came from, of like, if I just focus on teaching my sisters, I can start doing YouTube videos of this, which I now have 15,000 subscribers on YouTube. I can start doing
mm.
TikTok videos, which I'm now close to 40,000 followers on TikTok. So it's become this staggering, just one after the other. I've just kind of spread myself maybe a little bit too thin, but I love it anyway. um, because then I can see people who message me or comment on my videos of like, oh, thank you, I got a job today, or especially in 2XU, like just today
Mm.
we hired another person, and in my head that's now another person that's added into the list of someone who knows and believes that they can work from home. So that's kind of where a lot of the happiness also and the drive to do it.
And that's what I really want to understand from that perspective, because from my experience in working with people, a lot of times people say, oh, I want to make money, I want to, and it's always about I. But what I'm getting a really strong sense from you is that it's about you, as in not you, the person, you're about other people. Your first thought is about other people. And I'm just trying to understand, what do you think that difference is? Because from my perspective, and what I understand about business and what works really well is identifying a problem and help someone else solve that problem. And it becomes really easy for me. You know, that's my whole tagline, is life is easy. And I'd like to say I claim it, but
Hmm.
Confucius said that life is really simple, but we insist on complicating it. And that's why I want to really understand from your perspective this desire to help people, and how is that different from, you know, your desire to make money, for example?
I think a lot of it is going back to that typhoon, because like I saw a lot of my mom's very expensive china, very expensive furniture just gone. Like a lot of our very expensive books sadly were all on the first floor.
Mm.
So for me, like being driven by money, also I think probably coming from the Catholic schoolgirl in me of like, money is evil, blah blah blah.
I used
I
to
think
be
it's also
Catholic. I'm Polish in origin, and so we were brought up
ah,
Catholic. But I say I can't be Catholic anymore because I don't feel guilt. So
that's a good, huh? That's a good way of separating that. But yeah, everyone in the Philippines grows up Catholic one way or the other. But yeah, so for me, again, kind of naturally comes from that being the older sister of like, my
Mm,
mom literally told me, and I have it in my etched out literally in my head of my siblings are my responsibility. I take care of them first before myself, and um, again, like seeing all of the things my mom built throughout the years of like making our home very, very pretty, just
mm,
gone. So like for me, I know how fast that gone is because of course after that typhoon, there were an estimated about 10,000 people who died, but
mm,
that wasn't even the real estimate because for us who lived there, we know that there was upwards of 15 to 20. Just because months afterwards, bodies were still getting recovered, so on and so forth. And I've heard
mm.
I actually met someone just a few months ago who was in that typhoon who lost 14 of her family members. So
Wow.
in my head, it's that fast. Like everything you worked for can be gone that fast. So then what lasts is how you have had other people like feel helped, feel taken care of,
Mm.
feel, and they can pass that along to the next person, to the next person. So I learned that story very, very early on, at 18. So then I kind of grasped on that. And like has lived in that way in the last couple of years as well.
And what was it like from that perspective? Because one of the things I wonder about is that role modeling that we get from our parents, and I look at that from my perspective. You know, an example, I remember when I was really young, I think my dad was the treasurer of the local footy club. And, you know, he would bring home the money and we'd all count it together as family and make sure that it was all there. And we did that. And there was always little things that they were doing to help other people. Was that something that you grew up with as well with your parents? And I know your dad worked overseas, but obviously he's done that to help his family. You know, from
Mhm.
that perspective, you know, with your when your dad has been there with you, what sort of behaviors did he do and your mum as well? What sort of things did you role model from them?
Well, both my parents were relatively the people that their parents depended on. Like my grandparents would always run to them, like, "Hey, I need this, I need that." So I saw that a lot of them just being willing to be able to help whenever they can, and if they couldn't,
Mm,
finding other ways to be able to help. My mom was a big volunteer woman. Like she would fly to different places to help them for typhoons,
wow.
and my mom herself was an incredible story of the typhoon where she wasn't there because she was at a training exam for her work. But then she, because of her connections of her volunteering before, she was actually one of the first people to fly into our city. And she walked 8 hours to get to us because she was so worried. She walked over
Wow.
dead bodies, over debris, over like just fresh, like because the storm was Friday. My mom arrived Saturday evening,
Mm.
so there was no help yet. But my mom trudged her way, and that's kind of the woman um, I would say now that she was because she sadly died 2 years ago of
Oh,
colon cancer.
wow.
But that was the kind of person that she kept showing up as. So it was easy
Mm.
for me to kind of see that. And know that it's okay, that it's good. Um, and that was, and like I said, my dad now, since my mom has passed, we started a family cafe, and it's still the same thing that I see. He helps out people. He hires people that he knows are in need. He extends opportunities to people whenever he can. So even as I'm kind of all, quote unquote grown up, I still see my dad as a role model. Even after he has lost the love of his life, he's still this caring, loving person that I know him to be.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. And that's where I wanted to understand that component of that role modeling side of things. What about from your perspective? You go back to when you were you loved reading. You mentioned, I think it was 11, that you discovered that you love reading and started doing some writing as well. What was that like taking that step into that area? Was it something that you were concerned about, or you just gave it a go, or how did you take that step into doing the writing?
Well, I would also preface that my mom loved writing as well. So that was kind of a big part of me discovering, like, oh, you can do this. And my mom would write like little poems, and she used to love writing like us notes also. And
Mhm.
when Facebook came along, she was writing almost every day and making like
Yes.
statuses on Facebook. So it came from that for sure. And then for the love of writing, my mom is, if you were a encyclopedia selling person at our door, my mom would buy your stuff, just because like she wanted to put the reading on us. So that was kind of the two things. So my mom already loved reading, she already loved writing. I kind of naturally went into it. And then at some point, my mom had 200 Reader's Digest magazines in our
Mm.
house, and I read every single one of them, just because I was bored out of my mind. Again, like a lot of
No
beautiful
video
things come from
games.
boredom. Yeah, no video games. TV was repetitive. There's no iPads or anything like that. Um, yeah, with the writing, it was fascinating to me because when I started writing a lot of my friends were like, "How are you doing this?" Like it was so foreign for them to think. So I thought of myself as super special for figuring out how to do writing before anyone else could. Um, and so that's kind of where it all came from. It's still up to today.
So from that perspective, again, you mentioned your friends, and that was the next question I was going to ask. Because again, when we look at it, I know some of the things that I did when I was younger was different from what a lot of people were doing as the norm. As much as I don't think I matured until it was much later. But there was other things I just did that were outside of what was popular to do, so to speak, what the group was doing. How did you manage that from that perspective? How did you, with your friends doing, most kids are out there having fun, riding their bikes around or doing whatever that they do. But you were writing, and not only that, you looked up how to publish the books when it wasn't a thing. How did you,
Mhm.
what was that like from that experience as a personal experience to do things that were different to what everybody else was doing?
Um, I think a lot of it was, so I was bullied most of high school. That was kind of like and it's funny because my bullies at the last 2 years of high school, I became really good friends with them. Up till now, we're really still really good friends. We're part of we're a little clique that always meets up at least once a year. Um, so for me, like being bullied at a really young age, just because like I love to bring cutouts of magazines and I'll make scrapbooks in school, like in between recess, or I would be bringing all of these other things that made people like look at me weird. I think I got to the point where I didn't fully care as much, but I it still made me a lot like self conscious, like uh. It caused a lot of social anxiety when I was younger, but then in my head, I just got lost in my little world. So I think I didn't just see beyond or past that. I just had a little world that I was exploring. I wasn't really hurting anyone. I was mostly like taking the risk myself. And even with the like publishing my own book, a lot of that was just like curiosity driven. A lot of that was like, oh, what would if I press this button, what would it do? It was mostly a lot of that. And it's like my mom gave me a lot of breathing space to explore and like find things for myself and like um and because I was naturally creative, I jumped from one thing to the other. So it was a lot of different things where, for me in my head, I was just in my little own world. Like I wasn't hurting anyone. I wasn't pushing anyone to go into my world. I just had this little fantasy world that I go into. Oh, you're muted.
And I'm muted because I had a cough then. So sorry to the audience. Thank you for that.
No worries.
Um, from that perspective, when you were talking about being, in your own world, and I made a note here, you didn't care what other people think. How did that transition happen? Because a lot of people, with that awareness, we're always concerned, especially now when you look at the social media world. Not only that, the plastic that's on social media, we enhance photos, and when we edit, and this will be in the edit, I deliberately leave, I made a mistake. These are human things to do. That's what we do as people. How did that transition happen where you went, okay, it doesn't really matter what other people think? And what was that like from a perspective of your own empowerment?
It was really hard because it seemed like in my head, if I was doing something to myself, I didn't care what other people thought. But if it
Mm.
was affecting other people, it was just this very loud thing in my head of what would if I did this, like what would that mean? Like up till now, and it's because my mom was this kind of person, but she was also very strict. So then
Mm.
a lot of what my mom would say would of course just go into my little brain. Like until now, I still have to ask people when I'm in their house if I can get some food. Like if because my mom would get angry sometimes if we touched her snacks, basically, without asking. There's like little things that I would still notice, like years after I've gone through
Mm.
therapy. I've read so many self-awareness books where it is still a struggle. And I mentioned like I have social anxiety from time to time. I have been diagnosed by so many other things, and a lot of it has become where I am open to other people to helping, even though I'd rather do it myself, which is very ironic to the business that I've started. Um, and ironic, it also makes sense. But it's just the untangling myself from other people's voices so I can find what mine was. Because as amazing and as strong-headed my mom was, she's also a very strong voice. So even
Mm.
I usually skip this part of my story, but I actually dropped out of college. I ended up dropping out because my PTSD after the typhoon was really bad. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't be in the city that I was in. I actually I moved to a different city so I
Mm.
can like have a little bit of peace. So for years, my mom and I fought of me going back to college, of me wasting my life on an online job or a publishing company that I didn't really know what would be
Yeah.
the turnout. So that was kind of the struggle back and forth of like finding my voice, finding my footing without having a lot of people influence what I really wanted to do. Because I just had this gut feeling that whole time that this is my path. Um, and then years later, sadly, when my mom got diagnosed with cancer, one of the first things she said to me, I remember this. This is the most precious memory I have of my mom now. We were cuddling at 6 a.m. This was the day after she got her diagnosis. And she said, Leanne, I'm proud of you. You fought against me, the dragon of all moms, and you won. You succeeded. Because at the time, I already had 2XU. I was getting speaking gigs. I've been to different countries speaking on stages. And that now is forever in my head of like, I found my own path. I forged my own path of something no one has really done until
Mm.
now. Like, and if looking back through my high school classmates, they've gone through the lawyer, accountant, doctor path, which is good for them because they've loved it. But for me, I forged my own path towards the life that I have now. So it was definitely a lot of back and forth and struggle of like, should I do this? Should I do that? Until I now have like a stronger sense of like self and who I am, that I can voice out what it is that I want in life.
Where did that drive come from, do you think? I mean, I love that story that you talked about because a lot of people experience that with their parents, and that struggle of finding yourself. And there's many people I know, I've friend lawyers, ironically, that are in the later part of their life and they're going, if I could do it again, I'd do it differently, where they followed that path. But you stood up and said, "Hey," and you referenced your mum being that. She said that she was the dragon of all mums, and I love that analogy that she's this big protective mum that wants the best for you. That's the picture I got when you said that.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I believe parents do that out of genuine caring. They want that for their children. But you had a different approach. You we got a lot of resistance, and you mentioned that about
Hmm.
dropping out of school and or out of college, and having those discussions with your parents. And I remember putting it in context with my dad. And we have a great relationship now, but there was a point there where we didn't so much. And they say that
Hmm.
um, the boy doesn't become a man until his father dies. And my dad has died for me metaphorically. He's still alive,
Hmm.
and it was over a packet of chips. I was staying at his house in between. I'd bought a house and sold a house, and I was houseless at that time. And I bought some Pringles chips were expensive. My dad's quite frugal, and he walked into the kitchen. I'm eating these chips, and he goes, "Why'd you buy them for? They're expensive." And for whatever reason, I didn't argue. I didn't need to justify. I just calmly said, "I like them." And he goes, "Yeah, but they're expensive." And and again, without being defensive, I just said, "I like them." And I remember the nod. He went, "Huh," and then he walked off. And our relationship changed from that point, where it was almost as though he recognized I was an adult and could make my own decisions, and his job as a parent was done. And so I'm just wondering from that perspective, going back to that drive where you're having those, forging your own path, as you put it. Where did you think that came from? That to constantly go against that grain that you were being put forward as a better path for you. Where do you think that drive to do that came from?
First of all, I love that story. It's such a I know that moment because I've had that moment with my mom. Um, that
Yeah.
was such, yeah. I know that switch over feeling. Um, For it, now that you're asking it that way, I would say I think I took the personality of my mom and just went
Mm.
with it, and that's why she hated it so much.
Yeah.
Because
So
my
you were
mom
your
was
mum.
that was my mom is I keep saying is because I sometimes still forget, but is was the forger. Like she would forge
Mm,
on, she would do these opportunities that was so foreign for other people, but for me, of course, was super normal when I was looking at it.
yeah.
Um, like she I found this out later, but then she moved our whole family to a different city, and it was because she was offered a job as one of the pioneer employees for that business. I didn't know at the time. I only found out that story after my mom died.
Wow.
But it was so weird for me. But then at the same time, like, oh, okay, we're just moving to this like city 5 hours from my hometown. Then,
Mm,
and like she would make us like do family trips every summer. Um, she would be the speaker like at different places as well. She would be invited for different things. So I think I took that personality type of hers and like
mm,
just went with it. And of course she instilled a lot of that in me, like don't care what other people think, you know, make sure that you're doing this, you are your own person. And even after like a year after my mom died, my sisters and I were talking about like, yeah, I remember my mom would keep like doing just affirmations to us like while she was hugging us. For me,
oh.
I made a joke of like, sadly, as the eldest, my mom didn't really do that. She would just tell me without the cuddling part. But then for my younger sisters, my mom was more cuddly with them. But it was still the um, you can forge your path kind of feeling that my mom always had. Because she had a lot of dreams and she had a lot of things that she wanted to do in her life as well. So, yeah, as you've asked that question, that specifically where I got that drive from, yep, it's my mom. Like all most of the credit of my life is my mom.
Because they say that the mother's curse is, you know, when you have children, I hope they're just like you. So maybe your grandmother said that to
Yep,
your mum, and that's what
yep,
you.
probably, yep.
And where did you mentioned dreams as well? Where does that come into the picture from that perspective of what you wanted to do? When you look back to, you know, being at school and you know, loving reading and starting to write, where did this dream? I mean, you became, you know, CEO at 20. You partnered with your current boss now to start 2XU. How much of that had the foundation in the dreams that you had, and where do you think they came from?
So I can actually point it out specifically to where it came from because I have a scrapbook and I kept that scrapbook, kind of like a vision board scrapbook that I have still in my room to this day, even as I move to different places. It's the
Mhm.
scrapbook that I have, and it's a cutout from I forget which magazine now, but it said New York Times bestselling author. So I have
Yeah.
that cutout pasted on there. I have the cutout of the Empire State Building. So basically, my dream is to have a business in New York. So that's kind of the still the drive. And even with
Wow.
2XU, it was originally called, it was a very cheesy name, NIPA, which is New York Personal Assistance.
I
Um,
love that. I love
so
cheese.
it's the
I like cheese with my I like nachos. Was it cheese with my nachos?
there you go. Um,
Or was it the other way?
so that's been kind of the drive of me getting to the point like the publishing company I was working for is US based. Like my boss is American. He's from I keep forgetting who he's actually from. Um I'm it's not coming to me right now. But in my head, I was like, oh, if I get a job at the US company, then I could have a chance to go to the US. Still have not gone there yet. I do have a US visa, but I'm just kind of in my head, like I can't afford going there. But it's I want a reason to go there. I want to be invited to a speaking gig or be starting a new business or be, you know, flown in to do X, Y, and Z. Um, because
Private
like
jet.
I
Love it.
maybe sure. I'm good with economy plus. But it's the dream and the intent of the, you know, if you can make it here you can make it anywhere. I
Mm.
was watching like Glee where they had that episode where Rachel Berry makes it to New York, and I'm like, I want that for myself. So it's that it's, you know, I don't know how old I was at that point. 14, 15-year-old Leanne making those cutouts, one
Mm.
day making it in New York, that I've still brought on with me to this day. Of like almost everything that I do, I'm like, oh, will this get me closer to there or further from there? Those kinds of questions back and forth. So it is that big, my big hairy audacious goal.
And how much from that perspective of having that dream motivates you day to day? I mean, when you're running a business, and I know from my own experience where I've run business, I've started businesses that haven't succeeded, and had to shut them down, and that can be pretty demoralizing if it's not held in check. And even day to day running, where you and I'm sure you've had this, where you've started the business, or you've had a plan for the business, and you start to do it, and it just doesn't work. How does having that dream motivate you to keep trying?
I guess more than anything, the New York dream has kind of become a um, just listening to inspiring stories from people who've made it there. Listening from, I have this account that I follow where he interviews like a lot of people in New York. Um, it reminds me that the crap that I'm going through, that I might be going through at the very moment, um, it won't. It's part of building that Leanne who lives in New York. It's kind of
Mm,
that's always how I think of it. It's part of me building the Leanne who is
mm,
in line with that dream of mine. Because the Leanne now, yeah, sure, she can go to New York, but I don't think she can fully live in New York and actually survive it. And that's kind of every time that I have a
mm,
setback, every client we've sadly lost, every uh, thing that where it's blocked me. Like actually, literally this week, I was supposed to be flying to Europe for. I was invited to speak at this really big Nomad event, but sadly my visa never arrived. So I'm still here in the
oh,
Philippines. I'm still living in a little bit of that disappointment. But at the same time, in my head, I'm like, no, once that visa arrives, maybe then I can go to New York. That makes my visa a little bit stronger so that I can get visas for other places, so on and so forth. So I'm reframing my brain. Thanks to therapy also every single time that I come across something that no, it's from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, of like
mm,
whenever you give meaning to something, to suffering or a roadblock, you release yourself from that. So that's kind of
mm,
every single time that I've had that roadblock. I realize and think of that like, okay, what's the meaning of this? What meaning can I put on this? Because only you can really put meaning to your suffering. So then I can move forward. Like I had to go through the typhoon that almost killed me because then
mm.
it's built me to this kind of person. So anytime I have something where it's definitely not as planned, I look up my dream of New York because it's usually a poster in my room, and I like remind myself like that's where I'm going, no matter what. F it, I'm just that's just my destination. So I'm gonna enjoy the journey getting there.
Mm. I love that. From that perspective, when we talk about, because a lot of people talk about Viktor Frankl, you mentioned there, and that people talk about life is suffering, life is pain, life is challenging. And I wonder about that. Is that the way it needs to be, or do we create that for ourselves? And I reference Shakespeare here. Shakespeare in Hamlet wrote, "Nothing is good or bad, thinking makes it so." And I put that in the context. I have a friend of mine, he's a seventh Dan black karate black belt sensei. And we were talking about hard and easy. And I said, well, hard and easy is relative to your level of experience. You're a seventh Dan black belt. If I asked you to do a grading at yellow belt level, how hard would that be for you? And he goes, to be very easy. And I said, it's not the task that's hard, then, is it? It's your level of experience. And I often wonder from that perspective, when you're looking at your life, when you and I'll come back to a framework when you mentioned about, don't know if you could survive it if you went to New York. Putting it from your context, because we always have those um, images where they have, okay, here's the plan, and they've got the top image of the plan. There's this beautiful, smooth, glossy, shiny road. And then they go, this is what
Yeah.
happened. And it's all over the shop and pit holes and walls and stuff like that. And I wonder from that perspective, when you look at those challenges that you faced, was it life was suffering, or was it a level of experience that you took on something that you quite didn't have the experience to do? You needed to get through it to learn that, but that suffering was more a lack of experience. And when you go back and do it a second time, it's a lot easier. How much of that, when you look back, is the case, and how do you work through that?
It's a really good question.
Mm.
For parts of it, I know it is a lack of experience. Like I've into XU, I've made so many mistakes, I've made so many assumptions of like, oh, this is how a business would look like, and I fail at that. Very enthusiastic 25-year-old me at that point, and now kind of looking back at it now, I've learned how to really hire like the right admin. I've learned how
Mm.
to really work with them really well. I've learned also to, for me, not to be super hard on myself, because I know I can be that way. But I also have this core belief, and it's funny because like sometimes that I flip through it, that I'm always lucky. But anything that I've gone through in
Mm.
life, it's because for a reason. And my mom loves saying that everything happens for a reason. So in my head, even if I go through some crap, like this time last year, I was going through some crap of figuring a few things out into XU. Now I'm looking back at it a year later, I'm like, oh no, I had to go through that so I can learn this. I'm still
Mm.
pretty lucky. Like it might take me a while to realize why it had to happen, but it still
Mm.
goes back to that core belief of mine of like, no, I'm lucky. Like it can be easy. I know I'm the one complicating it. But it goes back to the belief in myself that my mom put in there, belief in myself that seeing me go through all of these trials and still making it be a powerful experience, where now I have this life where I can pick up a laptop and like some of my clothes and just go to another island just because on a whim. I can, and that's actually what I did last Sunday. Instead of getting depressed of not going to Europe, I'm now in another island than I usually am. And whenever I think about it, like, yeah, I'm lucky. Like I've lived through this life with a lot of things and experiences that not a lot of people will go through, and it's because of that that makes me me. That makes me that lucky person throughout everything else.
I love that framework, and I lost count. I was counting, and then I lost count of how many times you referenced lucky then in that framework. And I love that framework because I wonder about, and well, I think that's where gratitude and the power of gratitude comes from. It sets a focus. So from that perspective, when something doesn't go your way, is that something that you that automatically clicks in and goes, no, I'm lucky, and then you start to notice other things? Because when you look at your reticular activating system, it filters what we
Mhm.
see. Do you think that framework of I'm lucky filters what you see and adjusts how you deal with things?
It's not always automatic because like I know when it comes to my survival mode, that's the first thing that clicks in. I'm like, okay, I just need to get over this. That's kind of
Mm.
the first instinct usually that goes into. And then afterwards, like I activate like, nope, I'm lucky. What am I missing here? What have I missed because I wasn't looking at it in this lens? um and then I start to run through, okay, these are the opportunities that I've lost, but then these are now the things that I now have moving forward. um so it's definitely first that survival mode of like, okay, let me just get through this, and then I can
Mm.
start self-reflecting. Um, just because that's kind of how it's worked for most of my life so far.
Mm. And I love that statement that you just added then, "What have I missed?"
Hmm.
How much of that, having that framework, has opened you up to seeing other potential opportunities?
A lot of the time, like and it's mostly like things of how I can build it for the next time. That's usually how I look at it. Like like I said, like last year 2 weeks you kind of went through a bundle a little bit, and it was mostly because I was trying to manage 14 people at a time, which you probably shouldn't be doing. And I should have hired basically a manager earlier on before I got to that overwhelm.
Mm.
Um, and it was that lesson of like, oh, that's what I missed. Like I should have gotten to the point where I hired someone faster rather than me trying to take on all of these amazing assistants that I was working with. So that was kind of any time that I go through that, I was like, oh, okay, that was what I missed. Okay, now this is what I can put in the future moving forward. So it's a little bit easier. And like for anything else that I missed, like for so many other things that I think about that I've gone through in life of like, oh, I could have done that better. And then instead of feeling bad about it, then I do better the next time. Like I apply it immediately into my life. So then I don't have to struggle or go through it again as much as I can help it.
Mm. How much of that, from that perspective, you mentioned about, hiring a manager, and we're talking about their letting go, and this is often a problem for people, um, that are CEOs, that are or senior managers or own a business, is that need to control everything. How do you
Mhm.
how did you let go? How did you go, okay, I need to, or was it exhaustion going, I'm gonna manage all these people and I need to do something, or what was it?
The tipping point for sure was it was just a lot of people were displeased and I didn't even know. Like I was kind of almost totally
Ooh.
blindsided. Because
Mm.
when people were facing me, like, oh, everything's hunky dory, blah blah blah. And then I found like other things where they weren't as happy. They weren't as actually satisfied with what they were doing. And because I missed that, I was like, if someone else was working with me and they wouldn't I would just be supporting them so then they wouldn't have to miss that. And that's kind of that's my goal. Like I told my managers this because now I have multiple ones because of that lesson for last year. I told my managers this of like my goal is to support you so you can do your best to support our assistants.
Mm.
Um, so it was that change of shift basically of mindset that's helped me a lot.
Mm.
Because when I ran the publishing company, we already had like the management structures and all of that, so I didn't even have to think about hiring managers or anything like that because it was
Mm.
already in place. To XU, I was doing just most of it on my own. I had my co-founder who was an amazing consultant, but it was still me figuring things out and then calling up if I needed help for certain things. So like hiring my very first manager into XU. I love her. Her name's Amy. She helped me figure out like a lot of things, and now we have our second one, and we have our third one. So we're every single person that I hire, like, oh, I should have done this sooner, kind of feeling. But at the same time, I'm like, no, I had to learn that lesson hardcore so that I can move forward and be better in the future. So it's always that going reframing of like, I'm lucky because now I've learned this at 27 versus having to learn this at 40 later on in life.
Mm. Yeah, I definitely, and I admire that with what you've done, because at 27, I think I was still hanging out in bars and doing silly stuff. So it's amazing what you're doing from that perspective. But I love, I mean, from that perspective, again, do we have to go through, when you look at all the learnings that you have? A business partner I have, she says, and she was, found it, excuse me, really profound. Well, she said, you learn through pain until you learn to learn through joy, which was really profound from my perspective, because I was going, and I was wondering from that perspective, is it the case, and from your experience, is it the case where we don't start really listening until it gets painful and we go, actually, I need to find another option? Is that, from your experience, and how have you overcome that?
Yeah, multiple and different examples in my life. Um, so for that one, for the particular on the management one, because that's come up two other times in my life where I was trying to manage everyone else. I wasn't delegating as well as I should be because I thought like if something goes wrong, I'd rather be my fault than someone else's fault. That was kind of the thought that I had in my head.
Okay.
So the two other times that it happened within the publishing company, the second time then I did hire a manager who's great and has been doing really well ever since. But then the first time it happened, I was like, is it wrong to manage 20 people at the time? I was 20 years old at that time. I was like, is it wrong to manage 20 people at a time? And of course, because again, that we don't have a lot of the experience of that. Like, oh, the next time it happened again, the second time where I was managing, I think I was only managing like 11 people at a time. And
Mhm.
then I was like, that's why. um, and I do believe that sometimes like we do have to go through that. We do have to
Mm.
learn certain things because then the next time we know how to do better, we can put in systems and beliefs in place as well to make that a little bit better. And it also gives us time. At least for me, my experience, like it gave me time to have kindness with myself, because like I said,
Mm.
I'm very hard on myself most of the time, and because I kept making that mistake in my head, like I was failing, I was not doing well. Maybe I should just quit. Maybe I should just apply for another job and not try running a business ever again. And then I was like, no, no, no. We had to learn this lesson. Now this lesson
Mm.
is learned. And anytime that I start another business after 2XU or whatnot, I now have learned that like only, okay, after 6 people, then I hire a manager. That's kind of now in my head every single time. So then it's a little bit easier and kinder on myself to get to that point because I went through all of that other crap that I had to go through in the first place.
So talk about it from, we go back in time again, so back in that DeLorean. Can you talk about from that perspective, because you mentioned earlier about suffering from social anxiety, and you talked about there about being kinder to yourself. Can you explain a little bit more about that process that you went through where, because it's so common. People, we beat ourselves up all the time. I know I did it all the time. I'd do something fantastic and find that one little thing that wasn't quite right and go, "Oh, I could have done that better." Can you
Mhm.
talk us through some of that experience and what were your learnings from that and how you addressed that?
I know the social anxiety came from being bullied. Like,
Mhm.
the I would bring books to school, like, oh, look at that weird girl bringing books to school, or I would be on my corner, like writing, because I had this story idea in my head.
Yeah.
Um, it came from that of like the voices outside of me, like talking how bad it was, how weird it was. And then I've just kind of learned to focus on like, no, I'm just doing this for myself. I'm not doing this for other people. So it doesn't really matter. If I start doing it for other people, that's when it matters. It was that extremes basically that I had to kind of learn how to cope and have that, like I said, that kindness with myself. So it started honestly when I started, and this is a funny term, but I love doing it, going on self dates.
Mhm.
Um, like I would date myself. I would go out to a coffee shop and like intentionally, because of course there's been times where I'm just at a coffee shop alone, I'm eating dinner alone. But I've
Mm.
started putting this intention of like, oh, I'm taking myself on a date. I would go to
Love
like
that.
Starbucks, or bring a book. I would be writing down any ideas that I
Mm.
came through. I've gotten comfortable with being alone, not just with
Mm.
being by myself, but being alone. And for a
Mhm.
lot of the periods in my life, I've had to go through being alone. I hated it. Absolutely hate it. I hate sleeping in a room where I don't have a roommate. I hated not because I'm so used to my siblings being there all the time, in the same
Ah.
room as me. So it was realizing that, and I started doing that self date of like, because people will look at me weird that I'm out by myself. I took myself on a really fancy date where I dressed up, had my hair done, and went and got myself the biggest steak that they could give me. Had to do a takeout, but it was just by doing those experiments with myself. I traveled to Taiwan for a week and a half by myself, doing those
Mm.
experiences of learning who Leanne was outside of the voices helped a lot with the kindness. Because anytime that I would start, because I know that feeling in my head where my brain feels a little bit numb and like everything's too noisy. I'm like, okay, breathe. Okay, what would Leanne do right now? What would Leanne like to do? Like, and no one else matters. What would Leanne like to do?
Mhm.
And then doing that has kind of helped a little bit, a lot with the social anxiety. Because if I
Mhm.
don't feel like going out, I'm not going to go out. I won't feel like
Yeah.
FOMO because I chose not to go out versus not being invited to go out.
Mm.
I know that if I run out of, I call it extrovert juice because I'm naturally an introvert. If I run out of extrovert juice, I will just say like, "Hey, I'm taking off. I'm good. Thanks for being here with me." So I've learned how to put in labels and terms for me to understand, but then outwardly, I can then communicate it really clearly with other people. So it's by learning to date myself that's helped me kind of clear up so many of the beliefs and strings that I had on me that I didn't even know. That at the point where I the same year my mom died, I also got broken up with after 10 years of in a relationship.
Mm.
Literally was with that person since I was 15 years old.
Wow.
And it was such a foreign thing to like, who do I run to now? Oh no, I can learn how to run to myself. I can learn how to self soothe. I can learn if I'm having a panic attack, I know how to breathe through it. I know how to sort my own thoughts.
Mm.
So it was that spectral again of life throwing fireballs at me and me just like not really dodging, but I'm like, okay, I'll learn how to survive this too because I'm lucky. I get to that point where again, I've learned so many of these lessons as someone young rather than having to learn it later on where it might be harder for me to undo the strings and unlearn a lot of the things that I had in my head.
I love what you just talked about then, and particularly about when you mentioned that you're out there and feeling like you don't want to be there and going, "Oh, it's okay, I can go." Um,
Hmm.
that's that's really powerful, and I'm glad that you shared that because I think most people, and I wonder, are most people really introverts that we just cover a lot and we pretend to, because
That's true.
yeah, well, I do wonder. I mean, I know from my perspective, a lot of people think I'm an extrovert and I can talk quite confidently to people. But certainly, I remember there was many times I hated going to. I used to go to a lot of corporate events and things like that. We were networking things, and I hated it. It was like,
Well, one way that I reframe this is one of my best friends also sadly still has her social anxiety, and she was like, "I don't know why, but when I'm out, blah blah blah," and I'm like, "Oh, you've gotten to the point where you're choosing where you put your energy in, because when we're out, when we're
mm,
talking to people, you're putting your energy towards that person, and sometimes, and I call it, you just go low bat. You're just low battery, just a 10% low battery right now, but it's okay because then you can recharge by going back
mm,
into yourself." And with that, it has helped her a lot with like that thought of like, oh, I'm just choosing where I'm putting my energy. It's not that I'm anxious about it. It's not that I'm scared. I'm just now constantly choosing where I put my energy to. So I do believe that sometimes most people are actually in the introvert side, like they want to be alone, they want to recharge. So then with that thought, it's then reframing it like you only have so much energy. Like
mm.
for me, whenever I say people are to people that I'm introvert, it's the same thing. Like, no, but you talk so much, and like you do these speaking gigs where like thousands of people listen to you, or like you have this YouTube channel and you do this, and I'm like, it's mostly because I'm just mostly talking to myself.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, I kind of run away. Usually, even after a speaking gig, after I've been on stage, I go to the bathroom and kind of like recuperate myself. And it's
Mhm.
okay. Like I've learned that it's okay. That's it. It's me, going back to again dating myself. And it's such a funny thing whenever people don't recognize, like, oh no, you're just low bat. I've actually used that term with other people, like, oh, I'm just exhausted, I think I want to go. I'm like, oh, okay, you're low bat, it's no worries, just go ahead. Just that low battery is okay, because we're not supposed to be this infinite sources of energy. We're supposed to be limited because we now can choose where we want to spend that energy on.
How much of that do you think that anxiety is caused by an expectation that you have to behave a certain way, because otherwise people might not like who you are?
A lot of that's also from my mother, because she taught me that. Of like, you should behave this way, you should sit this way, you should talk softly, you should do this, you should do that, especially when I'm around her friends. Um, but I, again, we both understand now that we're at this point, like, no, that was just a motherly love. That was just like she
Mm,
was just making sure that we wouldn't get hurt if someone thought of it this way because I misbehaved in this way.
mm,
So for most of my life, up to when I started therapy, I had that, like, I should show up in this way, I should do this. I had this very like rigid way of seeing myself. Whether for other people, I
mm,
was super forgiving. Like if people were like 10 minutes late for me, it's fine. It was like a lot of
yeah,
the people pleaser in me, but it was through that process, going to therapy, dating myself, that I started getting these cues from other people, like, oh, it's fine, like we don't
mm,
really care, like you're not and it was especially when I was younger, where in the little town that I was in, that I grew up in, everything was about connection. So if you piss off one person, you probably have missed a lot of opportunities for other things. But then moving to another city where like no one knew who I was, kind of was also really freeing. Moving to
yeah,
going to different countries where I barely spoke the language also freed me up from who I was. So
yeah.
it was kind of just expanding and expanding myself further and further, that I was like, oh, it's okay when I make a blunder, because then I can just always try again.
Mm. This being hard on yourself, because you mentioned that. I mean, you're being a people pleaser, as you said. Oh, well, that's what I heard. And
Mhm.
from that side of things, I mean, you're very understanding as a people pleaser. You're very understanding when people don't live up to expectations. What do you think it is for people where we don't apply that same thing to ourselves? Where we're extremely hard. Like, it's almost the opposite. And I did that when I was younger as well. If I'd be very understanding of people. Someone be late for something like that. But if I was late, it was like, oh, that was the worst thing in the world.
Mhm.
What do you think it is that dichotomy that causes that dichotomy?
I think, and I, again, also therapy, I realized that I was seeing someone less than a human. That was kind of where it was, because I was
Oh,
kind to all humans except for
wow.
myself. So
Yeah.
then when I starting the dating, started seeing myself as
Yeah.
who I am, then it was harder for me to say no. Then it was harder for me to I would actually, like, I have a 5 minute limit on Zoom. Like if someone doesn't show in 5 minutes, I leave.
Yes.
Because I've now put that point to myself of like, hey, I'm human too. Like I
Yeah.
can feel things, I can do this, like I don't have to be this rigid. Like the being hard on myself, it pops up once in a while, but what I do is I can now recognize it. I can now reframe myself I'm like, no, it's okay to think this way. It's okay to do this, especially if it's doing for yourself. There's a reason why in airplanes you're taught to put the oxygen mask on yourself before
Love.
you help other people, because then that's how you can help
Yeah.
other people. But you can't pour from an empty cup. And I say that over and over again to our assistants, where within like the first 30, 90 days working with their client, they're like, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling drained. I'm like, take a break. If your client says something, tell me so then I can talk to them about it. But you can't pour from an empty cup. If you keep pouring on empty, it's just going to
Mm.
be air. It's not going to be anything. Plus, then you're hurting. You're going to be hard on yourself. So, basically, everything that I've learned being such a Type A person for most of my life, I'm now teaching other people not to be that Type A. So then you can breathe and be a little bit better about yourself.
How did you learn that though? What was the transition that you had to make? And you've mentioned social anxiety. You mentioned some therapy as well. What was it that drove you to do that though? What was the awakening that you had that, hey, I'm a person. I exist. Therefore, I'm wonderful.
Part of it was when I started becoming a speaker.
Mhm.
And I get asked all the time what my story was, what I did with my life, so on and so forth. That was kind of the first time that I saw myself as human a little bit, was when I started doing that. Like I did Toastmasters for 6 months. And of course, when you're in Toastmasters, you're encouraged to tell your own stories, tell this,
Mm.
bring up this part of your life. There's like prompts that they give you. And it was that process of me actually taking a pause and looking at my life. And I was
Mhm.
like, oh, and of course, like now every time that I'm doing, like when you did the introduction to me of like at 15 years old, she did this, like, oh, that's not normal. Oh, okay. So it's kind of that kind of thing of realizing how full my life has been. Um,
Mm.
so now every time that I do, like you've been doing such an amazing job of like making me realize a few things just by doing this podcast. But since with other podcasts I've done before, they ask really good questions. So then it makes me pause and look at my life. I'm like, oh, I'm more human than I thought I was. So it
Mm.
was that start of like me, instead of writing other people's stories, instead of writing just angst and essays and articles, I started writing about myself. I started writing about my life,
Mm.
of the life that I've led so far, that has kind of taken me to that self-awareness of like, I can be kind to myself too. Okay, cool. How does that look like? And then I kind of started figuring that out afterwards.
Yeah. What do you think it is that because and it's so common where people will beat themselves up, that they won't recognize that they're awesome. What do you think it is that in as people we just don't seem to recognize that we exist? So that's a miracle in and of it. When you think about it, I mean, even just the fact that that you were conceived, it's quite a miracle.
Hmm.
What do you think it is in our nature that we don't recognize that we lose that?
I think it's that loss in pause. Um, I forget who it was now who said it. Um, Someone who said it, and I found this so profound. Of the power is in the pause. And
Mm.
they even did it where the pause button, or like your foundation, and this is like where you can find yourself. Um, we go through life rushing through. We go through life with our own internal deadlines and timelines of when we should have this,
Mm.
when we should have that. I remember when I was 13 years old, I thought at 26 I'd get married and have kids. Right now, I'm still like in a brand new relationship and still working towards my business. So it's all of these internal things that we put up on ourselves, where we get to the point where we're harsher, where we're like we don't get that
Mm.
pause, we just barrel through everything else. But for me, as someone who barrels through everything else, like doing that pause every single time helps, because then I'm reflecting, I'm seeing parts of my stories that I probably never recognized before, just because I was rushing through that chapter in my life. But now, at chapter 27, almost at chapter 28, I'm seeing that like, oh, that's what I was supposed. That's why, like in my bio, I break it up to like my ages, because I see that
Mm.
as different chapters of my life. Um, and every single time I take that pause, like it's now a tradition that every time it's on my birthday, I write this really long post on Facebook. That's basically that chapter of
Wow.
Leanne, and it's every time that I do that pause that I get to realize a lot of things about myself, about where I'm going,
Mm.
and it causes that kindness, because again I'm seeing myself a little bit more human every single time. So then I'm respecting myself. I'm putting myself in situations where I'm happier, not where I could be miserable just because other people said I should be in that position.
Yeah.
So it's then given me the pause has given me then the choice to move forward rather than just moving forward and barreling through.
So the pause has given you that chance to reflect on it. In those reflection moments, when you're thinking about it, because we filter, we've talked about that earlier in this podcast, and we filter. So from that filtering perspective, I'll give an analogy from that. Many years ago when I lived in Perth, my girlfriend at the time lived north, and the road north had lots of traffic lights. And so as I'm driving to see, obviously excited to see, go, you're excited
Your
to see the
girl,
car
yeah.
now? Yeah, exactly. So I'm excited. And so every red light that I got, I'm super frustrated. And I'm like, why am I getting all these red lights? And then because maybe I'm anally retentive or some weird thing that I have, I said, am I getting all the red lights? And I got a notepad and I kept it next to me as I was driving. And every
Mhm.
traffic light I went through, I marked whether it was red or green. And it turned out I was getting heaps more green lights than I was getting red lights. Massive amount more, but I wasn't noticing them because my filter was, I'm getting the red lights. That was the highly emotional part. That was the blockage of getting there. How did you set your filter when you're taking that time, those pause moments, that you're actually noticing the opportunities that you have?
I love that because it's just like a lot of the like particular activations and how you're
Mm,
looking at life.
yeah.
Um, well, it's not always like perfect. Like I said, I've parts of going to therapy is like recognizing that sometimes I have a black and white view, that I have extremist view sometimes where just because I made this one blunder, like I said,
Rah!
this because yeah, I mean this one blunder, like, oh, I should just quit doing 2X, you should close this down and just kind of be an employee forever and ever and
Mm,
ever and not start another business ever. Or I'll have like, oh, this is what happened, that's it. Like I nothing could change that. So
mm,
by again taking that pause, it's not so much as reframing it, it's more of like noticing the other details. It's more
yeah.
noticing putting it on a notepad if it's green light or red light, if it was this, or if I could not even changing the filter, or if I could see the story in a different way. As like a someone who's obsessed with books, someone who was a journalist at one point in my life, I've learned to see the other side of the story, as I've learned to see the other side of the coin.
Mm.
um so it's not just changing the filter, but it's getting the fuller story, getting the fuller like the
Ooh,
fuller part
yeah.
of it, of like, oh no, it's not that the universe is against you, everything else was happening on this side. It's not that this this person quit because they were angry at you. No, they're having this part of their family has gone
Mm,
to crap, so they had to give up this job. So it's always keeping in mind and realizing that it's never just how you see it, it's also then starting to see like the views from other people of how it came to that point.
mm. And from that filter perspective, w coming back to this, I don't like using the because I said Shakespeare, "Nothing's good or bad, thinking makes it so." So I don't like using positive and negative, and even in a battery perspective, the positive, negative, when you connect a battery to a circuit, it just shows the direction of the flow. So I try and steer
Hmm.
away from it, but I'm gonna use it because of the context, that it gives to this story is when things happen, if something is not going as we expect, we always expect, there's a better word, that we expect the worst. And I relay this when I was working in the corporate environment. I was in an office, and then the boss calls you up and says, "Can you come to my office?" That's all they say. And immediately think, what have I done wrong? And that was where I walked into the office. And more often than not, or very rarely was I getting in trouble for something. They just wanted to give me information. So I went, I need to make that mind shift of that it's not a negative that they're calling me into the office. That's me creating that. What do
Hmm.
you think causes this thing where when something happens, and I had that recently where I contacted someone, and we were working on something together, and I hadn't heard from them for a few days, and I'm thinking, oh, maybe they don't, not wanting to do this anymore. And I immediately shifted and said, no, actually, they're just whatever, and I'll hear from that soon. And we had a fantastic meeting, literally probably about 2 hours after that, because they'd contacted me. What do you think this reason is that we always think of it, the worst is going to happen?
Well, it's going back to recognizing that as humans, we have the strongest, I forget what the actual term is, but basically the strongest train of thought in your head is your survival system. And it's
Mm,
always that. Like it's a tiny, like we call it like our monkey brain. It's the
mm,
tiniest, but it's like the strongest highway in your brain. There you go. It's the
yeah,
strongest highway in your brain where it's the
yeah.
survival mode. And usually when everything shuts down, it's still lighting up. So
Mm,
when we go into this worst case scenarios or the black and white, or if it's the extremist views, it's just us, our brain protecting ourselves. Like
mhm.
we want to go into that meeting disappointed. So if something does disappointing happen, we were just going to say, "Oh, I was right." But so then it's that reframing. Like read this wonderful book called The 5 Second Rule by Mel Robbins, where she talks about
Mm,
anytime that you do that, you count five, four, three, two, one, and then you place it with a happy thought. Um, and that has helped me a lot. Sometimes I forget it, so I try to retrain myself on it. But it's just also recognizing and having that awareness that that is the strongest highway in your head, is
mm,
that survival mode of like anytime a tiger is going to come up and we have to run. That's kind of the strongest part of it. So when we expect this worst case scenarios, we are able to then recognize like, hey, is this true or not? Is a tiger actually going to come out in the bushes, even though I'm in a 10-story or 20-story building where there's probably not going to be a tiger popping out anytime soon? But it's still that monkey brain that's operating everything else when you shut down. So then starting to then like doing that exercise of 5 4 3 2 1 lights up everything else in your brain, so you don't have to just
mm.
have your monkey brain be the only thing that's turned on. So it's common, it's a thing, but for me, I've learned to recognize that at any time, it's always the worst case scenario. Like, no, is this my monkey brain or is this my full like head thinking of this? Most of the time, it's my monkey brain thinking that.
Yeah, I love that. And what you're talking, and the Mel Robbins thing you mentioned there is creating a new neuro association. So, because we're creatures of habit,
Mhm.
we do things out of habit. What we've learnt is a habit. Our beliefs are just thoughts we've repeated over again, which is a habit, and it becomes something that we just do
Mhm.
unconsciously. Do you think, from that perspective, that you can actually retrain it so that it happens automatically at an unconscious level?
Oh yeah. Um, like I've had so many of I've had to retrain myself in so many things,
Mm,
and it's usually like a little bit of a scary thing to have to unlearn something, because in my
mm.
head, like, okay, what do I replace it with? But sometimes you don't even have to replace it with
Ah,
anything.
yeah.
It's just that you have to just kind of undo that part of the belief system that you have in your head.
Mm,
Like, of course, as a growing up Catholic, money is evil. If you're rich, blah blah blah, you're an evil person, so on and so forth. I had
yeah.
to unlearn that as someone
Mm,
who went into starting a business, as being
mhm,
someone who went into the capitalist system, basically. So it's there's there's few things that you can change about yourself, and when the first part of it is just awareness of like, hey, this is something
mm,
that's not serving me anymore. I
mm,
want to change it. I want to make it be where it makes sense for me to move forward with this train of thought. um but it is a lot of reframing and having to remember to say things to yourself, of like having to remember that
mm.
anytime I look in the mirror, I don't like what I'm seeing. Instead of thinking, oh, I'm fat, oh, I'm feeling this, like, oh, I can work on this. This I know how to fix.
Yeah.
Versus like going into that negative spiral of like, I don't look right. I want to look like this. I want to look like, no, I'm going to start working on this.
Is that too, I mean, what you mentioned there about, looking and going, "No, I'm fat, but, no, I can fix this." Is it also too, I mean, because that kind of has, and I'm gonna use the word negative again, a negative slant to it, that something's wrong. But is it, from a perspective we can go, "Well, right now, this is right for where it is today. Tomorrow might wanna be different." So that little chocolate bar that, and I'm a chocolate holic, so I need to stop that. But
I'm
but
the
right
same
now,
way.
yeah.
I'm someone who's lactose intolerant who loves cheese. So on the same page.
We can go, that'll take the conversation a completely different
Mm.
path. Maybe they would do that offline. Um, from that legal background, on the chocolate thing, I was like, I said, I'm only gonna eat the first bar of the chocolate, and then I ate that, and I went, "Well, that now is the first bar, so I'm gonna eat that one," and then the chocolate bar was gone.
There we are. I was like, oh, it's just a wrapper now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what chocolate bar? Um, but from that perspective, I mean, we look at it, is it a case where we can have that attitude of going, "Hey, right now, I'm awesome. This is how it is. This is how it's supposed to be." Um, tomorrow I'd like it to be different. Like, and having that future vision going, okay, I'm like this now. If this is wonderful, if I'm like this, it'll be better. And then come back to that learning from joy as opposed to learning from pain.
It depends on different parts of life. Like, so
Mm,
there are certain things where me getting my lab result back that my liver has enlarged, that's like, oh, I have to fix this now. But
yes.
then me coming back with a result of like, oh no, you're just a little bit overweight. Wait, I'm like, okay, I'm good for now. I'll start working on it
Mm,
tomorrow. I'll start putting in the. So it depends, I guess, on the urgency of how much you do need to shift. Like realizing all of a sudden that you've been this really bad boss for most of your life, then you might want to shift that for the next person that you hire. You might want to make sure that that doesn't happen again for the next person
mm.
you're working with. Um, but I guess it's just that of like the impact of it on yourself or the impact of other people, how big it is, and then choosing again, having that intention and that choice of okay, this is something I am putting my attention that I want to change, versus like, oh, okay, this is good for now. Like I don't have to change much. This is aligned with who I want to be anyway. So if I wanted to actively do it, I can choose to do that later on.
I'm kind of blown away a little bit because I don't often hear people use the word choose, because I made that shift a long time ago when because I'd ask people, what do you want? And they'd go, oh no. And then I said, what do you choose? And they went, oh, I've got a choice. I haven't heard many people say that, especially to the intensity that you have. So I'm really like going, wow, this is cool. I found a kindred soul
Thank
here,
you.
someone who likes to choose. I probably wasn't clear in how I was putting that question, because what I was getting to wasn't that we don't do anything about it now, but we look at it, and what I was really getting to was separating yourself from the behavior. Obviously, if
Um,
so in the moment you'd be going, hey, I'm wonderful because I exist. I might be overweight, and that's because of a behavior. So I'm still going to like myself, but I need to do something different. And in the future, not I'm waiting to do it in the future, but I'm thinking of a future me that is actually leaner, which means, Damien, throw the chocolate bars out.
um, I guess for me, when it comes to that, I always go back to my systems mindset. Like,
Mm.
I have this default in my head that when something is broken, it's probably a systems issue. Um,
Mm.
so if it is, and we can appreciate things as they are, but then maybe looking back under the hood to see if everything else is running as it's supposed to be, or there's might be need of a gear change, or
Mm.
you might have to start your car differently because now there's this new system in place.
Don't put chocolate
So
on the shopping
whenever,
list.
or just putting it somewhere a little bit like not seen.
Higher up. You can't reach it. I'm
For
six
me,
foot.
it'll be
That's got to be
easier.
pretty high from my perspective.
For me, it's easier because like anything almost above 5 feet is hard for me to reach. Um, but then like isn't putting systems in place of first is the awareness, then the recognition, because it's different
Mm,
when you're aware that you're overweight and you recognize it, you have
mm,
accepted it, and then keeping in mind again that kindness to yourself of like you're a full
mm.
human being, you can fluctuate in weight, you can feel like this, you can
Ah.
feel like that, and then okay, so then what systems are you changing, what parts of
Mm,
yourself, those are the small loving the book Atomic Habits, where what's a small atomic habit that you can now install into your daily life,
mm,
where it is a little bit easier for you to lose weight without having to push a lot. Like for me, when I started, at one point in my life, I was like 67 kilos, which was like really
mm,
overweight for someone who's 4'11". The only thing I changed was like no sugar. Like that was it. It was so hard because then I had to find like alternatives to sugar. I used to be a white chocolate girly. Now I'm a dark chocolate girly because white chocolate always has sugar in it. Dark chocolate, I'm a little bit safer. So it was making these conscious atomic shifts in my life where now it's added up. Like I've lost a lot of weight already. I still have a lot to lose more, but I now have these systems in place where even if I do occasionally, have a little bit of white chocolate, I know how to go back to my previous state because I put in the systems to be able to be that person.
I love that analogy too, from the perspective that higher level of where these little system changes make a massive difference. And I think most people can relate to the weight experience. I'll share this experience as well. From my perspective, there was a
Yeah.
time where I weighed over 110 kilos. I was, even then I didn't look that fat, but I did look big because I'm 6 foot, so it's different.
Yeah.
But
It helps the height.
But I specifically remember we were skiing in Switzerland, and by the time I get to lunchtime, my legs are burning. They really hurt because I'm carrying a lot of weight. And then from that perspective, all I did was I ate less and I didn't drink much. And I dropped, I think it was 20 something, nearly 30 kilos.
Wow.
And I didn't exercise anything major with exercise outside of what I was already doing, which wasn't much. And then a year later, we're back in Switzerland skiing again, and I could ski all day, no problem. And it was just losing that carrying that extra weight made a massive difference.
Yeah.
But it was that simple system change of just going, I'm not going to have as much food on my plate. That was the shift that I made, and I dropped heaps of weight. We do need to get onto the business side of things as well. So taking that from that system side of things, taking the conversation, this is my little segue, is to, I'm trying to work it out. How do I segue this? And we'll talk about systems. From that perspective, though, with how you're operating and the systems that you had in your day-to-day life, I mean, you're the CEO of an organization and you decide that you're going to start your own organization. What was that transition like? What was that from your mental mindset going? Was there fear there? Was there worry there? Was there a lot of, I know you're a type A personality, so I'm guessing there was a hell of a lot of planning in place. Talk us through the starting up of the business. What was the motivation you've mentioned a little bit, but can you expand a little bit more on that motivation and also what were the concerns you had? Because a lot of times we look at people and go, they started this business and it was, immediately great. But that's not how it works. Or was it in that case for you? No.
It was, well, a lot of it was a lot of figuring out. So, like I said, the shift from running the publishing company to wanting to start my own business, it came from like, oh, they don't actually need me anymore. I've automated and systematized most of the publishing company where I can travel for months at a time where I'm not that needed. So then what else do I want to fill my time? I was 23, again, bored out of my mind. Boredom is always a great source for creativity. And like I said, we had this course on how to hire a virtual assistant. Someone said, hey, can you just do this for me as a service? And that very first client of ours, it took me 7 months to get another client. And it was interesting to figure out like how to get that next person. This is also interesting for me because I loved that buffer time, because in that buffer time I was able to figure out systems for 2XU, because it was so different to have like plan A, like, okay, this is how we're going to do this is how we're going to, versus like as someone who, when we had their first assistant working with them, like, oh, we have to add this system, like, oh, we have to add this, we have to create like this onboarding system so much differently. So it was always different to plan the system out in my head, and of course now having someone run through it and having to adjust tiny little things, so it's a little bit easier for the next person. And the other funny thing to note is when I got to XU, when I first got a first client, it was October of 2019. And I got our first assistant March of 2020, which was 2 weeks right before the lockdowns happened. So 2XU has literally been born out of remote work, and having to figure out, because my plan in my head, like, oh, we'll just do more speaking gigs. We'll just fly to somewhere else so we can get more clients. We'll do this, we'll do that. Like all of these planning of traveling and like meeting people and growing 2XU that way, all scrapped, just because everything's like locked down. So having to go back to the drawing board of like, oh, we can get it through referrals. We can go it through partnering with this one person, doing this, doing that. And then now I get like clients from my YouTube channel when they see my content talking about how to hire an assistant. So it's been that buildup of, again, that small micro systems of how can I do this better? How can we add this? How can we expand the system, even not just adding things, but expanding it a little bit further. To now where 2XU was just a recruitment business, we now have this whole operation leg where we like automate things for our clients. We do X, Y, and Z for them to make sure that they can get to the point where they can walk away from their business. So it's been those small increment systems that I've been installing throughout the whole way. Anytime there's a bump, anytime there's a problem, oh, there's probably a system that needs updating or a new system that needs to get put into that.
And what was it like from your perspective of that emotional side of things? I mean, when you decided to do it and then you have those things going out of the way, again, the type A personality, social anxiety, obviously you're dealing with people. What was that like, having to Get out and find clients?
It was a journey. Um, Especially since like
That's that.
when you're working at the
I could sense that word going journey.
it's another journey on its own. Because like when you hire a virtual assistant for your business, they will literally have every finger that they have on different parts of your business, because it's not just hiring someone from your marketing who's just then focused on your marketing or
Mm,
focus someone on your sales. Virtual assistant is someone who becomes your second brain. So for me, a lot of the journey was figuring out privacy settings, figuring out how to make sure the client feels confident giving them the access to their email, figuring
mm,
out how to have the assistant feel confident on pushing back if they're working more than 50 hours a
mm,
week, how to
mm,
have that conversation with their client. So it was a lot of social side of making sure people felt confident and safe at the same time, and at the
mm,
same for me, like having to manage so many different personalities, both clients and the assistants. Again, I did blunder. I think I lost half of 2XU last year because of that blunder of me not hiring a manager fast enough and the assistants
mm,
not feeling cared for. um
mm,
I can now admit that was really hard for me to say out loud, that I've lost half of the business because of that blunder. But it was the reality of it at that time, was that
mm,
people were leaving because I was stretching myself out too thin and not getting help fast enough,
mhm,
and they felt not taken care of because I was so focused on growing the business that I wasn't. Of course, I was failing at management.
mm,
Um, so it was a lot of figuring out. It was a lot of making sure that uh, I was giving value, because I'm always like value first whenever I'm interacting with people. And also making sure that I take care of myself, because that's always my
mm,
default. It's like making sure that Leanne has a cup to pour from. So
mm,
is that until now, until this day, it's still that balance back and forth of like uh, making sure people feel the confidence and empowerment to move forward without me,
mm,
and at the same time, like because I've been doing that a lot, making sure that I also am empowering myself and giving that love
mm.
and life back to myself.
Yeah. So how did you manage that when you're starting a business? Because starting a business is very intense. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. How did you find that balance to have time for yourself, time for, your relationship, time for your friends, time for your family? How did you find that balance?
A lot of it is having a list of things that I know I love to do. So
Mhm,
then it makes it easy for me. Like having, again, go back to choices, having things to choose from rather than starting from scratch. So
mhm.
I always have, like, I have two books that are always near me. Or if it's not that, I always have a Netflix series that I'm watching. So I have defaults where if I have even just 5 minutes to myself, I can go back to myself.
Mm,
Like in between meetings and so on and so forth. I have this reset that I can do where it's not too much.
mm,
There'll be times where it'll be too much, where I'm pushing for something, or for example, 2XU, we just got um, a ton of clients coming in. So I have to make sure that I balance working with clients, working with the EAs, and now their managers. Um, it's yeah, having those defaults help, of like knowing that this is the choice that I can do. Either I'm reading, I'm watching something, or I'm cleaning. That cleaning is actually one of the things that I love to do, just rearranging my room. So that's one of my own
uh,
defaults of like, is there a sock that I can
there's
pick up
something
right
there is
now?
something therapeutic about that, and I relate. Maybe it's because I've got a military background, but I vacuumed the house last night for that therapeutic reason.
Mm-hmm. Or can I water my bajillion plants that I have in my room? So it's one or the other. I have a choice basically, instead of just letting
Mm.
myself doom scroll on TikTok.
Yeah, exactly from what you're saying is it's a choice that you decide to find a pace that take that therapy when you need to, and then get back to it. And from that
Mm-hmm.
perspective as well, expanding on the business component of it, when people are, the product placement side of things for this interview, talk about the services that you offer, and how people would engage and what they need to look for if engaging someone like 2XU.
So for Turkey, what we do is we really just specialize in hiring, training. We've now added this AI empowered executive assistants
Mm,
for a lot of our clients to help them. When you're solopreneur, when you're doing everything yourself, you've basically gave yourself a new job, versus
mm,
when you're a business owner, where you have the systems and behind you, so then things can run without you. So it's
mm,
kind of lot of what we do is, aside from just getting another assistant in your business, we help like automate things, create systems, make it more fun. And also at the same time, you basically have a whole team behind your assistant, helping them, tweaking them, managing and training them all at the same time. And when 2XU started, I really had just had this vision of, once we get to 100 assistants, which we're about 25% there, just fun just to say, is then we can start like adding like mini businesses underneath it. So it has become this multi-passionate thing for me, to keep running. And when it comes to us, our clients are mostly people who are, actually most of them are content creators like yourself. They're either consultants or coaches, where they have a lot of data. They have not found a way to store it or to manage the inflow of things that they're getting.
Yeah.
And usually I say that you're ready for an assistant once you have a recurring way to make money. Like you probably should just hire a freelancer or a project based person if you're just a one-off launch, because you have to take care of that person moving forward. You have to make sure that they feel they have a routine. You have to make sure that they're growing into something, because when you hire someone, don't forget to see them as human. Don't forget to see them as like extension of yourself, of like, we call 2XU because they're now your second brain. So it's keeping that in mind, that you don't have to do it all yourself. I freaking love my assistant with all of my heart. She's freaking amazing in everything that she does. And it's because of her that I could have, I could have gone off to Europe and goofed off, because she would have taken care of communications and everything else. Or I could do so many things in my life that before I hired assistants, it was so hard for me to do, because of doing everything on my own. And that's kind of the same freedom I'm hopefully being able to offer to our clients as well.
I love that. And what's the best way to get in contact with you for people that might be looking for that kind of service?
So it's going to 2xyou.com. Right there, we actually have a whole scorecard they can go through if you are ready for an assistant. So it makes the whole process a little bit easier.
Fantastic. And we'll include all that in the show notes as well, and details of the services you offer in the show notes for everybody to click on and do all that kind of stuff. I got lost there because I'm excited about this next question, which I didn't preempt for you because I wanted to surprise you with it. If you were to leave the audience with a key takeaway, a key wisdom, a nutshell, what do you want them to take away from this interview? What would be the life-changing thing that you would impart?
It's funny because we had so many really good golden nuggets throughout this whole interview. Part of that's like you ask really, really good questions, and you made me think about a lot of things I haven't thought in a while. I guess for golden nugget, just because it was something that resonated with you a lot, is the power is in the pause. Like, know that you can pause. Know that in all the craziness, you can ask the universe for like, give me a minute, kind of moment and it's okay, because again, looking at yourself as human, you do need that pause. You do need to see what choices are actually in front of you, rather than barreling through plan A. Oh, there's plan B, C, D, E, F, all the way to the end of the alphabet. So the power in the pause is definitely one of my favorite ones. I have so many other in my back pocket of like favorite nuggets, but the power of the pause is definitely one of my top ones.
I love that. Leanne, it's been so wonderful chatting with you. It's been so much fun, so much wisdom that you have to share as well, so much experience of all different things. And also too, I really appreciate that you opening up and sharing those experiences, the personal ones, which help the audience as well. Thank you very much for taking the time on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Damien. This was so fun.
Thank you for being part of the Share.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.